was a frigid December night, and the wind howled like a banshee, rattling the old cabin. Inside, the fire flickered weakly, casting long shadows on the walls. Edward sat in his worn armchair, the only source of warmth enveloping him in a faint glow. A half-finished book lay in his lap. He had lost interest in its pages long ago, the words swimming before his eyes. Just when he was about to surrender to the drowsiness tugging at him, a sharp, frantic knock broke the silence. It echoed through the hallowed space like a gunshot. Edward's heart raced. The nearest neighbor was a few miles away, and out here in the thick of the storm, he rarely welcomed visitors. Another knock came, urgent and desperate. Edward stood, drawing in a deep breath, trying to shake off the unease that clawed at his stomach. He approached the door tentatively, the old wooden floor creaking beneath him. The wind howled outside, carrying with it the sound of crashing trees and swirling snow. He opened the door and the storm rushed in, swirling past him like an angry spirit. But it wasn't the cold that sent a chill down his spine. Standing there, battered and breathless, was a girl. Her wild hair whipped around her face and her eyes wide, frightened, and filled with a desperate plea locked onto his. "Please," she gasped, leaning against the doorframe for support. Her voice trembled like a leaf in a storm. Before he could respond, she collapsed to the ground, her body crumpling in the snow, white splattered with crimson. Edward's heart thundered in his chest as adrenaline surged through him. He had to act fast. He knelt beside her, rolling her over gently. Her shirt was torn, stained with blood. Panic gripped him. He wasn't a doctor or a hero, but he couldn't just leave her there. He pulled her inside, wrapping her in a blanket and guiding her to the fire. "Stay with me," he urged, his voice steadier than he felt. She was shivering violently, her skin cold to the touch. He grabbed a small towel from the bathroom, dampened it with warm water and pressed it against her wounds, trying to stop the bleeding. He asked, looking for answers, hoping for a glimpse into her past. Perhaps if he knew, he could understand how to save her. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she looked up at him, her breathing shallow. They found me," she stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "I ran." There was an unsettling mix of fear and defiance in her eyes, a story buried beneath layers of pain and courage. He pressed, dabbing at the wounds with more determination than he felt. "Too long," she managed, her voice breaking. A shudder passed through her, and for a moment, Edward's heart ached at the sight of her fragility, like a flower wilting in the relentless frost. The storm raged outside, making the cabin feel like an island in the eye of a tempest. The wind screeched against the walls, a future unknown filled with shadows and menace, not just in the weather but in her eyes. Edward grabbed a nearby blanket, wrapping it tightly around her. He asked, wanting to anchor them both to the reality of now. She whispered, pulling the blanket closer as if it could shield her from her own memories. He repeated it like a mantra, grounding her in this moment. "You're going to be okay." Even as he said it, doubt gnawed at him. He felt the weight of responsibility settle upon him, an immovable force. At first she hesitated. The flickering fire light danced in her eyes, and he wondered what demons flickered there too. "I was at a party," she began, her voice trembling but gaining strength as she spoke. "I thought it would be fun. I thought I would be safe." As she spoke, Edward could see the memories rushing back, ghostly and haunting. Everything changed fast. They got violent. I don't even remember how it escalated. I just know I had to get away. Edward felt a pang of rage bubble within him, not at her, but at the bitter truth of what she had faced. "You did the right thing by running," he said, wanting to comfort her. But was that really true? Did safety exist in such a cruel world? Her eyes hardened, flickering with indignation. "I should have fought back. Instead, I ran." The fire crackled, its light reflecting off her wet cheeks. Each word was like a knife, cutting deeper into her spirit. "No," he said, shaking his head. "You fought, you survived." But he wondered, was survival really enough? He had always believed survival equated to strength, but faced with her struggle, could he really claim that for himself? The wind screeched louder outside as if to affirm her pain, howling like a wild beast. Edward felt the chill creep back in, a reminder of the world outside, waiting, threatening. The storm was relentless, and so was the past that haunted Marie. He inquired cautiously, leaning closer as she looked at him, the firelight casting flickering shadows over her ashen face. Her eyes flashed with fear. "I didn't think I'd see them again. I thought I could escape." Her voice faltered, and Edward's heart twisted at the fragility now laid bare before him. The truth sank in, heavy and unyielding. They would be looking for her. The shadows were not just memories. They were predators, hungry and relentless. What would come next, now that she was safe within the walls of his cabin? "I'll help you, Marie," he said, the resolve in his voice stronger than he felt. The weight of the storm was still heavy in the air. The world outside was chaos, but inside they began to make a plan. He would need to fortify their defenses, keep her safe, and more importantly, keep her hopeful. "If they come," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully, "we need to be ready. We can't let them take you back." Marie nodded, a flicker of gratitude lighting her weary eyes. In that moment, they forged a bond of desperation and determination, two souls drawn together in a world intent on tearing them apart. Hours passed as they began gathering supplies. Edward scoured the cabin, pulling out tools, making a makeshift barricade at the door, layering thick logs and furniture against it, all while sharing stories of his life before this night. He wanted her to know there was life beyond the storm, a future where the echoes of pain could fade into distant memories. As they secured the windows, Marie began to open up more. "I used to love the snow," she confessed, a bittersweet smile crawling across her face. "It felt magical. It reminded me of childhood." Edward watched her, intrigued by this side of her blooming amidst the darkness. He asked, genuinely curious. She hesitated, the shadows flickering back into her eyes. "It got messy," she replied finally. "People changed, and so did I, but this. Sometimes it's out of our control," he admitted, their vulnerability swirling around them like the storm outside. "All we can do is face it." The storm raged on. Edward could feel the tension thickening in the air. As the hours passed, uncertainty wrapped around them, a coiling snake waiting to strike. He could no longer ignore the reality of their situation. Another hard knock echoed through the cabin, battering against the door. Marie's eyes went wide with fear, and Edward placed a hand on her shoulder. "Stay quiet, no matter what," he whispered. The sound grew louder, the force behind it urgent, angry. His heart pounded in sync with the relentless pounding on the door. Who were these men? What did they want? He eased closer to the door, heart racing. "Let's hope it's not them," he murmured as he glanced out through a crack, peeking into the dark. The swirling snow cloaked everything in a shroud, but the shapes beyond were ominous shadows, hunched and moving with purpose. Marie's voice was barely audible, filled with an underlying tremor of fear. "Just hold on," he whispered. But even he wasn't sure if his bravado would be enough should they break through. A murmur of voices reached his ears, rough and low, chilling him to the bone. "You can hide all you want, but you can't run from us," a voice called out, slicing through the storm like a knife. It was laced with malicious confidence, a promise of retribution. Something inside Edward snapped. Fear melded into a fierce resolve as he stepped away from the door. He grabbed a heavy flashlight, shining it out at the approaching forms. In that moment, he felt an unshakable determination rise within him, not just to protect Marie, but to stand against the darkness that threatened to consume them both. With each desperate breath, Edward steeled himself. He wouldn't let them take her. This girl who had knocked on his door in a storm had ignited something within him he thought was long buried. She needed him. He would be her shield. As the storm raged on, swirling and howling, the stakes surged higher. Outside, they closed in, but within the fragile walls of the cabin, hope blossomed. In this wild night of chaos, Edward found a purpose, no longer just surviving, but fighting for someone he had barely known. "Whatever happens, remember," he said, turning to Marie, his voice steady. They would face this together, a wounded girl and a man who had just discovered courage in the face of fear. The door may tremble under the weight of impending danger, but together they would stand against the storm. The wind screamed like a wild animal, battering the small cabin in the wilderness. Inside, Lucas huddled near the flickering fireplace, the warmth from the flames reluctant against the chill swirling outside. He'd always loved the solitude of these winter nights, the crackling fire, and the way the snow painted the world in pure white. But tonight, something felt different. Shadows cast by the fire danced on the walls, and an unsettling feeling hung in the air, like a storm before a storm. Suddenly, a loud, frantic knock shattered the silence. It echoed in the cabin, making the hair on the back of his neck stand up. No one came by out here, especially not in such dreadful weather. Winter storms cut off the roads, forcing everyone to stay inside. Who could possibly be out there? Another knock followed, louder and more desperate. Lucas's heart raced. He pushed himself out of the armchair, heart pounding, and moved towards the door. He called out, though uncertainty gnawed at him. Was it a lost traveler, or something more sinister? Opened the door, and the bitter wind rushed in, biting at his skin. There, illuminated by the dim porch light, stood a girl, no more than 17, with wild, tangled hair, her face pale and drawn. Snow dusted her clothes, and before he could take in the whole scene, he noticed blood seeping through her ripped jacket. "Please," she gasped, eyes wide with fear. Without thinking, Lucas stepped aside. He grabbed her arm gently, pulling her into the warmth of the cabin. She stumbled, nearly collapsing on the floor. Lucas guided her to the edge of the hearth, the flames flickering as if eager for the addition of life. His voice was firm, but concern threaded through it. She shivered violently, her breath coming in shaky gasps. I need to get away." Her voice was frantic, and the desperation in her eyes pierced through him like a dagger. He hurried to gather some blankets, wrapping them around her trembling body as she sank closer to the warmth of the fire. The fresh blood on her shirt contrasted sharply against the yellowed fabric. Lucas felt a knot form in his stomach. He had to assess the situation to understand what had happened. "Just breathe, can you do that? Try to relax." He rummaged through the kitchen drawer, desperately searching for a first aid kit. "Please," she whispered again, her voice breaking. Panic mixed with urgency as he found the kit buried beneath some old tea bags. He hurried back to her side, kneeling down to examine her wounds. "Boys from town, they..." She clutched her hands around her knees, curling into herself. "I ran." Lucas's mind raced. The townsfolk were good people, but rumors of gang-like groups had begun to swirl. Young men fed on bravado, clouded by alcohol and misplaced loyalty. But this was something far worse. He spoke softly, keeping his tone calm amidst the storm outside. He laid out gauze and antiseptic with a steady hand, but his heart pounded against his ribcage. He needed to focus. She needed him. He asked, looking up at her. "Emma," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "All right, Emma." He started to gently clean the wound on her arm, trying to ignore the grip of dread tightening in his chest. The blood was thick, and the sight made him wince. "Thank you," she breathed, watching him with dark, haunted eyes. They held stories he could only imagine: pain, fear, the will to survive. Every movement felt charged with the threat of the outside world. Meanwhile, gusts of wind thrashed against the wooden walls of the cabin, as if warning them of the danger lurking just beyond. Lucas glanced toward the door, anxiety twisting in his gut. How long could they stay hidden? She asked, reading the tension etched across his face. "They won't know you're here," he assured her, though the uncertainty nagged at him. "Just stay quiet until the storm passes." As he continued to bandage her arm, Emma shared her story between shaky breaths. She had gone to a party in town, hoping for a break from her mundane life. Lucas could feel all the weight she carried in her words: how fun had turned into a nightmare, how boys she thought were friends had turned predatory. The air was thick with disbelief and horror. "I thought they were kidding at first," she said, her voice quivering. "But then they grabbed me. No one else cared, they..." Tears streamed down her cheeks, pain creating a river of despair. "I'm sorry, Emma. You didn't deserve that," he said, feeling helpless as he secured the gauze. He wished he could erase her pain, wipe away the memories that threatened to consume her. A flicker of a smile crossed her lips, but it was fragile, a flower braving the harsh winter. "I didn't feel strong." Fearing the very thing that kept her here, Lucas pushed the thought away. No, but the wind howled louder, sending a chill down his spine. If the boys from town were searching for her, when would they come? He caught Emma's gaze, seeing the spark of determination behind those frightened eyes. She asked, voice lacking the tremor it had before. The spark of survival flickered within her, igniting something in him as well. "It's snowing heavily," he replied, the gears in his mind turning. "We can't leave yet." If he could just stall for time until morning, maybe they could figure out a way to sneak her back to town safely, away from whatever danger lay beyond these walls. "We'll wait it out." He placed more wood into the fire, the comforting crackle of the flames dulling their fears for a moment. As the heat enveloped them, he couldn't shake the ominous feeling in the pit of his stomach. They sat together by the fire, the swirling snow outside a constant reminder of their plight. Lucas offered Emma hot tea, watching as her hands shook slightly while she took the cup from him. He couldn't help but notice the way her cheeks flushed with color as she warmed up, life surging back into her fragile form. "Thank you," she murmured again, her eyes softening. "It's just. I never thought I'd find someone like you out here." Something stirred within him. How could this girl, battered and beaten, find hope in such dark times? Lucas felt it rise up, the urge to protect her, to ensure she never went through pain like this again. "All that matters right now is that you're safe, Emma. You can rest." As the storm thrashed outside, they shared more stories, slowly peeling away the layers of fear and apprehension. Lucas learned about her family, her dreams of becoming an artist, how she wanted to paint the world in vivid colors rather than shades of gray. Emma's laughter, though soft and weary, seeped into the walls of the cabin. Slowly the shadows lengthened, but the bond between them grew stronger, a silent promise to face whatever came next. Hours passed, and the fire crackled softly, the storm outside beginning to wane, its ferocity gradually giving way to a quiet, eerie calm. Lucas's heart thudded in his chest as he glanced at the door, the creeping fear of what lay beyond the threshold growing again. Emma sensed the change, too, her eyes meeting his. She asked, her voice trembling again. "Let's see," he whispered, edging toward the door. With a deep breath, he cracked it open, the hinges groaning against the chill. He peered outside, snow still swirling but less violently. In the distance, shadows moved, a dark presence unmistakably searching. "Lucas," Emma's voice shook, panic rising. "Just stay low," he urged, gently pushing the door back closed the way a protective shield might act. Her voice rose. He could see the fight in her, the burning desire to escape, but they weren't ready. "If we go out there now, we might run right into them." Her words struck with urgency that echoed the truth of their situation. Watching her, he realized how strong she was, but Lucas also felt the weight of being the one in charge. "We stay quiet for now." Outside, footsteps crunched in the snow, drawing nearer. Lucas could feel the skin on his arms prickle, the air electric with danger. He glanced at Emma, whose eyes widened, filled with terror. In that moment, he finally saw her, not just as a victim, but as a person full of life, hope, and spirit. He had opened his door to her, and now he would fight to keep her safe, even if it meant risking his own life. "There's a back door," he finally said, turning quickly, his mind racing. The fierce determination in her eyes rekindled. Emma nodded. They both rose, adrenaline thrumming through their veins like an unstoppable current. In the dim light of the cabin, they crept to the back door, silent as shadows. A gust of wind rattled the walls, but Lucas's resolve held firm. He pushed it open slowly, wary of the sound it might make. The night air bit at them, frigid and merciless. Snow swirled around their feet as if trying to hold them in place. He urged, motioning for her to step out into the night. They moved low, staying close to the cabin, hearts racing. The footprints were close now, and Lucas could hear muffled laughter, dangerous and menacing. They crept behind a line of trees, crouching low, blending into the dark, white-draped landscape. Each breath felt heavy, each movement calculated. Emma whispered urgently, her eyes darting around. "We head east toward the river," he replied, heart pounding. "We need to be quiet and quick." He took a step forward, leading her deeper into the woods, the cold nipping at their exposed skin. Branches snapped underfoot, and he motioned for silence, knowing each sound could betray them. With every step, he could feel the weight of their fear pressing down, but he couldn't focus on that. All that mattered right now was making it past the danger that lay behind them. Suddenly, voices echoed above the sound of the wind. The menace in the tone sent shivers racing down his spine. Panic surged, but Lucas tightened his grip on Emma's arm, dragging her forward. He urged, pushing them through the thick trees. The world around them was a blur of white, but they focused on moving, not looking back at the danger that hunted them. Then it struck, the rush of the river. The familiar sound of rushing water grew louder, filling the air. Lucas pointed toward the bank, and they bolted forward, fear driving them onward. With one swift motion, they reached the edge of the river, the frigid water rushing past them. Emma gasped, anxiety flooding her voice. He shouted, scanning the area. There was a cluster of rocks overhanging the riverbank. They dashed toward it, the sounds of footsteps crashing through the brush fading behind them. Silence buzzed around them, and for an instant it felt like they could breathe again. He glanced at Emma, who looked terrified but determined, her spirit ignited by adrenaline. "Wait here," he instructed, scanning the area for any signs of their pursuers. As Emma settled behind the rocks, Lucas crouched low, peering down the bank, every sense on high alert. The cold seeped through his clothes, but he didn't care. The threat was still out there, and he wouldn't let it touch her. Minutes felt like hours. The wind howled above, leaving them freezing yet on fire with the need to survive. Just as a sense of relief began to swell within him, he heard the branches snapping louder, the laughter echoing back through the darkness. They were searching, and it wouldn't be long before they spotted her. Emma's voice trembled, pulling him from his thoughts. He hissed, gripping a nearby stone. He could hear them drawing closer, and his resolve hardened. He had to protect her, to be her shield against the dangers that threatened to engulf them. The words pierced through the silence, shaking him to his core. Lucas shot Emma a look filled with urgency. He said, adrenaline coursing through him. They darted along the riverbank, creeping through the shadows, hearts racing as they navigated through the treacherous terrain. Each sound sent fresh waves of fear coursing through them, and every second stretched into what felt like a lifetime. Then, as the snow began to clear, dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold. Lucas could see the glimmers of sunlight bouncing off the snow, illuminating a path ahead. "We need to cross," he urged, looking at the thin layer of ice along the river. Emma nodded, determination returning to her eyes, the light breaking through the clouds of despair. They stepped cautiously onto the ice, the surface creaking beneath their weight, praying it would hold. Behind them, voices grew closer, but they couldn't afford to look back. With each step, the icy grip of fear loosened, replaced by sheer will. They crossed the river hand in hand, united against the panic that clawed at their heels. Just as they reached the other side, the laughter erupted again. A group of silhouettes emerged from the trees, angry and determined. One of them shouted. Lucas felt time slow as he looked at Emma, their eyes locking in understanding. No turning back now. They would face this together. He yelled, pulling her into the dense woods, forcing themselves deeper into the unknown. They tore through the trees, the chase igniting a fierce energy within. Every pounding heartbeat echoed against the drum of fear, and the world faded away until all that remained was the instinct to survive. As they pounded through the underbrush, an unexpected sight gripped Lucas's chest. A flash of movement up ahead, a cabin old yet standing strong, a welcoming sight amidst the wilderness. He shouted, feeling an urgency that surged through him. In desperate strides, they raced toward it, the worn wooden door looming ahead. Lucas reached it first, shoving it open as Emma stumbled in behind him, and he slammed it shut, barricading the memories of pain outside with the sturdy wooden frame. Panting, Lucas locked the door, casting glances back toward the windows, their breaths heavy. The approach of footsteps crunched through the snow outside, but here within these walls, the warmth of promise enveloped them. Emma gasped, still trembling with fear yet flickering with the glow of newfound strength. He turned to her, heart racing and heartened by her spirit. "Now," he said, "we plan our next move." And in that moment, they were no longer just a wounded girl and a man lost in the wilderness. They were survivors, united against a world that had threatened to tear them apart. He could see it in her eyes, the resolve to not let the past define her, the courage to forge ahead into the unknown. The storm might be raging outside, but together, they were ready to face whatever came next. The cabin walls crackled with electricity, and somewhere in the distance, the sound of footsteps faded away, leaving only the soft whisper of hope lingering in the air. They were no longer just running. They were carving out a future, reborn from the darkness. The wind howled like a tortured soul, crashing against the solitary cabin. Snow whipped around it, swirling in chaos, transforming the woods into a white abyss. Inside, Noah sat in his worn armchair, the flickering fire barely piercing the deepening shadows. He had retreated here to escape the burdens of the world, to find solace in the quiet of winter, but tonight something felt off. A stirring unease wrestled with his thoughts. Just as he was about to surrender to the embrace of sleep, a loud, desperate knock shattered the stillness. It echoed through the cabin, sending his pulse racing. No one ever visited out here, especially during such a storm. With a heart heavy with uncertainty, he rose, every instinct telling him to ignore the sound, to turn back and pretend he didn't hear. But a flicker of curiosity pulled him forward. He called out, but the wind swallowed his voice. Another knock rang out, urgent and filled with panic. "Help!" It was a girl's voice, cracking and strained. Noah's heart lurched. He flung the door open and the icy wind rushed in, almost knocking him back. In the doorway stood a girl, barely 16, her clothes tattered and soaked. Her face was pale, smeared with dirt and streaked with blood. In that moment, time stood still. The world outside faded away, and all he could see was the fear etched in her wide eyes. She gasped, collapsing against the door frame, her body trembling. Panic surged through him as he instinctively reached out to support her. He urged, pulling her through the threshold and into the warm glow of the cabin. As he closed the door, he was greeted by the chilling realization of her injury, a deep gash on her arm, blood seeping through her clothes. "What happened?" he asked, his voice steadier than he felt. "I don't know," she whispered, her breath quickened. "I just ran. I couldn't stay there." Noah's mind raced. This was no ordinary situation. He wasn't a doctor or a hero. He was just a man seeking isolation, but she needed him, and in that moment instinct took over. He quickly grabbed a towel, wetting it with warm water from the kettle. He pressed it against her wound, trying to stop the bleeding. He asked, focusing on her eyes, praying for some semblance of calm. "Lily," she replied, wincing at the pressure of the towel against her skin. I was at a party." And then they started drinking. Her voice cracked and he could see the memories playing in her mind like a horror film on repeat. Noah pressed, feeling the tension coiling tighter in the air around them. "Boys from town," she whispered, tears spilling over. "They thought it'd be fun to scare me." The rage bubbled within him, coiling tightly around his heart. He had heard whispers about those boys entitled reckless. But here was the reality of their cruelty, standing in his cabin, bleeding in front of him. Noah cursed under his breath, a furious mix of anger and helplessness flooding his thoughts. "Just keep breathing," he said, trying to keep himself focused. He bandaged her arm with shaking hands, trying to cover up the wounds not just on her body but on her spirit. He could see defeat in her eyes, a rawness that he recognized, an ache that dug deep. As he pressed down the clean bandage, a silence fell between them, thick and heavy. They both understood that they were facing something far larger than just a wound. They were at war with the darkness of the world outside. She asked, her gaze piercing into his heart twisted. "I come up here to escape," he admitted, his voice low. He gestured to her wound, clenching his fists. Outside, the storm intensified, a furious howl that sounded almost alive. With every gust of wind, he could feel danger lurking just beyond the walls. "We have to make sure we're safe," he said, his mind racing, plotting their next steps. She nodded, gripping the edge of the table for support. Together, they moved towards the back of the cabin where he had stored extra firewood. "Let's barricade the door for now," he instructed, stacking the wood against it as Lily assisted him, her hands shaking but determined. They worked in silence, each movement laced with urgency. The fire crackled behind them, the only source of warmth in a world growing colder every moment. Once they secured the door, Noah turned to face her, the weight of the situation crashing in on them both. Lily asked, fear slipping back into her voice. Noah glanced out the window, searching the swirling snow for any sign of trouble. All he could see was darkness, a blanket of white obscuring the world outside. "We wait for the storm to die down," he finally replied. As they settled in near the fire, Lily wrapped herself in a thick blanket Noah had tossed her way. He returned to her side, knowing that her injuries were more than just physical. She needed hope, reassurance, a reason to believe that things would be okay. "Tell me about yourself," he said, trying to draw her out. She looked at him, her eyes reflecting a flicker of trust amid the fear. "I used to love to draw. I wanted to be an artist, paint the world in colors, but things got Noah asked, leaning back, creating space for her to open up. It's hard to explain. Everything seems fine until it isn't, Lily said, eyes dropping to the floor. A resonance of understanding passed between them. Noah knew that feeling all too well. We're both here right now, though, he said carefully. Yeah, she whispered, a hint of a smile breaking through her sadness. But it was short-lived, overtaken by the reality lurking just outside their door. She asked, her voice trembling. A fierce determination filled him as he began pacing the small cabin. He could face the cold world outside, fight back against the horrors lurking in the shadows. Lily nodded, searching his face for reassurance. And in that moment he felt a switch inside him, a deeper commitment to protect her, to be her guardian in this storm. As hours stretched on, the wind howled like sirens outside. The storm raged, but the bond between them grew stronger. They shared stories of their lives' moments of joy and sorrow, finding solace in each other's words. It felt strange being so open with someone he barely knew, but the shared trauma of the night forged an invisible tie that held them together. Tell me what it's like to paint, Noah said, intrigued. It's like breathing, she replied, her voice softening with the memory. Every stroke carries a piece of my soul. I'd love to see your work someday, he encouraged, hopeful. Maybe this was a moment where she could reclaim something that had been taken from her. Outside, the storm seemed to relent, the wind softening to a gentle whisper, the night beginning to settle. But just as Noah felt a glimmer of hope, a distant shout pierced through the stillness, echoing in the night. Lily, Lily! His heart dropped, icy panic flooding through him. It was them, those boys from town, and they were closing in fast. They're here, he hissed, moving back instinctively, ready to shield her from whatever was to come. Lily urged, her eyes wide with fear. What? No, but she was already ready to fight. We can't let them find us here. Noah felt the panic swirling, but he couldn't bring himself to move. There's nowhere to run. She grabbed his arm, desperation pouring into her face. I won't go back to them, Noah. In that moment, he saw the fire reignite within her, that fierce spirit yearning to survive. It matched his own, igniting a fierce determination in his heart. Okay, he said, reluctantly accepting. We'll find a way out. He glanced around the cabin. The back door, the windows, they were all sealed, but there was one last option. The attic, we can climb through the trapdoor. Quickly, they dashed toward the stairs, hearts pounding with each step. As they reached the attic, Noah pushed the trapdoor open, the wood creaking under pressure as they climbed inside, barely making any sound. Stay down, Noah whispered, bringing a crate up to block the door. As they crouched there, perched on the beams, the wind outside faded, replaced by footsteps getting closer, loud laughter echoing in the night. Come on, Lily. One of the voices called out, self-satisfied and taunting. Listen, Noah said, peering through the small cracks in the wood, watching as the figures drew near. Just stay calm, she asked, trembling slightly. They won't, he replied, every muscle in his body tense. But we'll outsmart them. As they waited, listening to their taunts, Noah's mind raced with ideas. He had to defend her. She was fighting for her freedom, and so was he. Facing those boys felt daunting, but fear could not take root. Finally, the voices drifted out into the distance, growing fainter. Noah exhaled, a wave of relief flooding through him. But what do we do? Lily's voice trembled, but beneath the fear he could sense a spark of defiance. We'll wait it out until morning, he replied. Then we'll find a way back to town. As the first light of dawn began to peek through the cracks in the attic, an unexpected calm settled around them. Noah turned to Lily, feeling unyielding strength in their shared resolve. We're going to be okay, he promised, feeling the weight of the night begin to lift. Lily looked back at him, hope rising like the sun. Thank you for saving me, she said, eyes bright with a renewed sense of purpose. No, he said quietly. Outside, the world seemed different, painted in fresh snow and morning light. They could hear the soft hush of the woods shifting, the winds of the past night giving way to something new. Together, they had faced the darkness, and now they stood ready to reclaim their lives. Noah took a breath, a steadying force against the storm that had nearly swept them away. We'll leave this place and never look back, he vowed, feeling the truth of his words echoing in the chamber of his heart. With Lily by his side, they stepped back into the world, no longer haunted by fear but driven by hope, armed with the strength that comes only from facing the darkness and emerging victorious. The wind howled like a wounded animal outside the cabin, sending gusts of snow swirling violently against the walls. Inside, Marcus sat in his worn armchair, sipping a lukewarm cup of coffee, the flames flickering in the fireplace casting shadows that danced across the wooden walls. He'd come here to escape, to melt into the solitude of the mountains, but now the storm outside felt more ominous than soothing. Just as he took a sip, a loud knock echoed through the cabin, cutting through the howling wind like a knife. Startled, he nearly dropped his cup. Another knock followed, urgent, frantic. The hair on the back of his neck prickled with unease. Who could be out here in this storm? His grip tightened around the cup as he stood, heart racing, moving toward the door. He called out, but the wind swallowed his voice. Instead, all he heard was the relentless storm. He opened the door cautiously, the hinges creaking in protest. The moment he cracked it, a gust of cold air rushed in, biting at his skin. And there, standing in the doorway, was a girl, no older than 18, a wild mane of hair whipped about her face. Her clothes were torn and soaked, and blood smeared across her arms. She gasped, her voice trembling with fear and desperation. She was on the brink of collapse, her eyes wide and haunting. Without thinking, Marcus stepped aside, allowing her to stumble into the warmth of the cabin. He urged, shutting the door against the angry storm outside. She crumpled to the floor, visibly shaking, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Panic surged through Marcus. What happened? The girl stuttered, clutching her side where blood seeped through the fabric of her shirt. He demanded, kneeling beside her. Her voice cracked, tears spilling from her eyes. Just boys from the town. Marcus could feel a storm of anger brewing within him. He had heard the rumors about the boys in town, the ones who thought they could do whatever they wanted. "You're safe now," he reassured her, though questions raced through his mind. How could he help her? "I'm Lily," she managed, trying to catch her breath. "They started drinking. I thought it would just be a nice night out." The helpless horror in her eyes caused something cold to settle inside him. He knew the dark side of people, of groups that turned into predators. He had wanted to escape all of it, to find solace in the mountains, but now that darkness had come knocking at his door. "Stay with me, Lily. I'm going to get you patched up," he said, picking up a nearby towel and soaking it in warm water. He pressed it against her wound, watching as her face contorted in pain. "Thank you," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "Let's try to get some of that blood to stop," he said, trying to focus on the task at hand. As he worked, he could see the fear in her eyes shift to something else, a mixture of shock and disbelief. "I thought I was going to die out there," she said after a moment, her voice shaky. "You're alive, and that's what matters," he said, the sound of his own voice steadying him. Lily nodded, but Marcus could see the shadows of panic still clinging to her. She whispered, glancing nervously at the locked door behind them. "Then we'll deal with that," he replied, forcing confidence into his tone. As he cleaned her wound, her eyes began to relax, her breathing steadying. "I didn't expect to find anyone here," she said, a faint smile breaking through her fear. "I came here to escape," he admitted, pulling the bandage tightly. The sound of the wind outside roared louder, but for the moment they were safe, enclosed in a cocoon of warmth and light. Marcus finished bandaging her arm, and they both sat back against the wall, the tension slowly slipping away. He asked cautiously, trying to draw her out. "Yeah," she replied, looking away, her voice trembling with sadness. "But they don't understand." He could see the pain lurking just below the surface. "I get that," he said softly, remembering his own struggles. She looked at him, and for a fleeting moment the fear seemed to dissipate. She asked. "I got tired of the noise," he replied. "Tired of all the people pretending to be something they're not." Clarity. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with unspoken truths. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed through the night, breaking their moment. The panic surged back, and Marcus shot to his feet. "Stay here," he ordered, making his way toward the window, peering through the small crack in the wood. Outside, the snow danced violently, and he could barely see. But then he heard it, the sound of laughter. It was unmistakable, filled with malice. The boys, they were out there hunting her. "We need to do something," Lily urged, fear alight in her eyes. "Just stay low," he instructed, fear tightening around him. Marcus moved to the back of the cabin, grabbing an old hunting rifle that had been passed down through his family. It was heavy but comforting, knowing he had a chance to protect her built into its weight. Lily asked, her voice a mix of doubt and hope. "I know how to shoot," he replied, checking the chamber. The laughter continued, growing closer. Panic mixed with anger surged within him. How dare they? In the sanctity of this place, he had hoped to hide from the madness of the world, but now the madness had marched right to his door. Lily whispered as she edged closer to him. "Wait," he said, taking a deep breath. "We'll let them pass." Minutes felt like hours as they remained silent, hearts pounding together in the dark. As the laughter surged closer, Marcus's mind raced, plotting the possible outcomes. He could feel the weight of responsibility resting heavily on his shoulders. This girl, this wounded soul, was now intertwined with his own fate. Then suddenly the voices drifted away, muffled by the storm. Marcus exhaled slowly, feeling a flicker of relief, but it was short-lived. Lily asked, eyes still wide with fear. "Maybe," he replied, stepping cautiously toward the door. He cracked the door open just a hair, peering into the bleak white expanse outside. The snow was still swirling, and he could see no sign of them. "Let's make a break for it," he said finally, adrenaline coursing through him once more. "What? To the attic, it's our best chance." He moved quickly, his heart racing. Lily followed him up the rickety stairs, clambering into the darkened attic as he pushed the trapdoor shut behind them. They could dimly see the outlines of old boxes, dusty furniture, and forgotten memories swirling around them. Lily asked, her voice trembling, but he could hear the defiance beneath her fear. "Probably not," he said, scanning the space. They crouched in the dim light, hearts pounding as they listened for any signs of movement below. The wind howled again, but it felt more distant now, and for a fleeting moment, a fragile sense of hope blossomed between them. She asked after a long silence, her eyes searching his. "Of course we will," Marcus replied, forcing confidence into his voice. The minutes dragged on, each second feeling like an eternity. The small space surrounded them in a cocoon of tension, every sound heightened. She asked, glancing at him. "I do," he said, taking a deep breath. "But it requires one more thing. We need to distract them." Her eyes widened. "I'll create a noise, something to lead them away from us." Lily's brow furrowed. "They won't," he replied. Adrenaline surged through him, knowing he was stepping into a dangerous game. But he couldn't let her face this alone, and deep down, he felt an unbreakable bond with her. He moved quietly, scanning the attic for something to use. He spotted a pile of old jars sitting near the corner, dusty and forgotten. An idea sparked in his mind. "We'll make a diversion," he said, grabbing the jars and holding them tight. She asked, eyes wide with worry. "I'm going to throw these out front. It'll make a noise and draw their attention away," he explained, his resolve strengthening. "Then once I'm out, you follow through the back." "Marcus, please don't do this," she begged, fear creeping into her tone. "You won't," he promised, holding her gaze. "You'll make it." With a determined nod, he took a deep breath and pushed the trapdoor open just enough to get to the ledge. He positioned himself, ready to hurl the jars out. He yelled, launching them into the snow below. The sound echoed like a gunshot, shattering the blustering wind. Crashes resounded as the jars broke apart, shards flying and the noise pulling attention instantly. Marcus shouted as he slipped back inside. Lily moved to follow, but not before a look passed between them, an unspoken promise of survival. He stood by the door, heart racing as he listened for the chaos unfolding outside. Cries of surprise and anger erupted, and he could hear their footsteps rushing toward the source of the noise. He urged, holding the door partially ajar. She slipped through, darting out into the snow-draped world as he watched. He called after her, adrenaline surging through him. Just as he was about to follow, a shout erupted from behind him. "Hey, you!" Panic clawed at his chest as he turned, sprinting toward the trapdoor, heart racing. He scrambled out just in time, wings of fear lifting him as he darted into the woods after her. He could hear the footsteps behind him, their laughter echoing, but he kept running. The trees blurred past him, the storm surging around him, but his focus remained on one thing, finding Lily. He yelled, desperation in his voice as he lunged through the snow, searching for any glimpse of her in the white haze. She cried out, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. He spotted her just a few feet ahead, and together they ran, hearts pumping, racing against the chaos that pursued them. "Keep going," Marcus urged, feeling the weight of both fear and determination surging within him. As they trekked deeper into the woods, the voices faded, and for the first time, they found a moment of calm. The trees encircled them, wrapping them in embrace away from the world that had threatened to consume them. Finally, they stumbled into a small clearing, the snow-capped ground glistening under the faint light filtering through the branches. "We did it," Lily panted, collapsing against a tree trunk, her breaths coming in heavy waves. "Yeah, we did," Marcus said, throat tight with relief. As they caught their breath, he peered around, scanning for any sign of danger. "We need to find shelter until the storm calms down," he declared, determination reigniting within him. She asked, eyes wide and tired. "There are some old hunting cabins further up the hill," he recalled, feeling that stirring of hope once more. They took off again, pushing through the snow, determination fueling each step. The frost began to bite at his hands and face, but he couldn't let that matter now. He could feel Lily beside him, her presence a reminder of what they were fighting for. As they ascended the hill, the wind murmured around them, the trees swaying slightly in the storm's grasp. Finally, they spotted a cabin, worn but sturdy, nestled just ahead. Marcus called, feeling a sense of triumph as they reached the door. He pushed it open to reveal the dark interior, a small fire pit in the middle. As they stepped inside, closing the door against the storm, a sense of relief washed over them. The cabin smelled of cedar and old memories, and for the first time that night, they found a flicker of safety. Lily asked, eyes darting around as she caught her breath. "For now," he replied, quickly moving to the window to peer outside. The snow continued to fall, cocooning them in a blanket of white. "We'll wait it out here." Lily nodded, her resolve returning. "Absolutely," he reassured her, a fierce determination swelling inside him. They settled in for the night, the storm raging outside, but within the cabin they created their own warmth. They shared stories, hopes, and dreams, piecing together the fragments of their lives amidst the chaos. As the fire crackled softly, age-old shadows danced upon the walls, but the darkness felt less threatening now. They were survivors, united against whatever encroached at their doorstep. In the midst of fear and uncertainty, they had found one another's courage, a powerful reminder of hope nestled in the cold of winter. And as the snowstorm outside softened to a gentle flurry, they both understood that no matter what lay ahead, they would face it together. They would reclaim their lives, free from the chains that sought to bind them. In that lone cabin, amidst a raging storm, they had found a spark of something greater: resilience, friendship, and the indomitable will to survive. Together, they would be unbreakable. The wind was a vicious beast that night, howling through the trees and rattling the windows of the little cabin nestled deep in the woods. Inside, Ethan sat near the fire, the flames casting flickering shadows that danced across the walls. He had come here to escape, to find peace in the solitude of the mountains, but tonight, peace felt like a distant memory. Something was in the air, an uneasy tension that wrapped around him like a thick fog. Suddenly, a fierce knock crashed through the stillness, sharp and insistent like a gunshot. Ethan's heart raced, fear clawing at his gut. Who could be out there in this storm? Another knock followed, more desperate this time, and Ethan's instincts kicked in. He shot up, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. He called out, but the wind swallowed his voice as he moved cautiously toward the door. The third knock came hard and frantic, a plea for help. That was all he needed to hear. He swung the door open, and the cold rush of wind fought against him, pressing in from behind like a malevolent force. There she stood, a girl, soaked to the bone, her clothes tattered and her face streaked with mud and fear. Blood trickled down her arm, staining the fabric of her shirt. She gasped, her voice shaking like a leaf in a storm. Before he could fully process what was happening, she stumbled forward, nearly collapsing at his feet. Instinct kicked in, and without thinking, Ethan pulled her inside, shutting the door against the howling wind. "Stay put, I'll get you help," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. He ushered her toward the fire, concerned that she might be too cold to move. "Lily," she replied, her eyes wide, glistening with unshed tears. I ran away." he asked, panic bubbling under his skin. "The guys from town," she said, fighting to catch her breath. "They." Ethan's heart raced, rage and sympathy intertwining in a fierce knot. He had heard stories about young men from the nearby town, intoxicated by bravado and entitlement, but hearing it come from this girl made the horror feel real. "Let's get you cleaned up," Ethan said, acting on instinct as he fetched a rag and warm water. He could feel the warmth of the fire at his back, but all it did was intensify the chill that coursed through him as he pressed the cloth to her wound. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice a low tremor. As he worked to clean the cut, he could see her shivering, a mixture of both cold and fear. He asked, curious yet cautious. "We were at a party," she explained, tears spilling over as she spoke. "I had no idea they were like that." Ethan remembered his teenage years, the betrayals and alliances that ebbed and flowed like the tides. He could sense the disillusionment swirling in her words. He pressed gently. "I didn't know where else to go," she admitted, her strength wavering. Every story of survival is woven with threads of fear and hope, and in that moment Ethan saw the strength it took for her to escape. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside they were cocooned in a fragile moment of safety. "Hold still," Ethan instructed, wrapping a clean bandage around her arm as he looked into her eyes. "You're going to be okay, Lily." A flicker of gratitude passed through her gaze, but it was immediately overshadowed by the shadows lurking just outside the door. She whispered, the fear palpable. "They won't," he assured her, though the creeping doubt in his mind threatened to surface. "Not here." As he finished bandaging her wound, silence enveloped them, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the crackling of the fire and the howling wind outside. In that quiet, they exchanged glances, both wrestling with their emotions. He finally asked, wanting to connect with her, wanting to offer more than just physical help. "It all happened so fast," Lily said softly. "One moment we were laughing, the next it turned dark. They cornered me, got angry when I tried to leave. I thought I could just walk away, but they didn't let me. I was so scared." Ethan felt a pang in his chest. He had always tried to be the protector, but here was someone who had faced the darker side of humanity head-on. He thought of all the times he had been reckless. This girl had felt the weight of that recklessness in a way he could hardly fathom. "This place isn't safe if they come looking for you," he said, concerned. She asked, her eyes wide with uncertainty. "I'll barricade the door," Ethan offered, moving toward a small pile of firewood. "We'll stay quiet until the storm passes, but this isn't a long-term solution." Just as he finished stacking the wood against the door, another loud crash shook the cabin, a noise that felt too close for comfort. His heart raced. The wind howled, but now it felt like something more like danger was on the other side. "Please don't let them find us," Lily whispered, her voice trembling as they crouched together by the fire. Ethan glanced towards the window, the swirling white obscuring everything outside. "We just need to stay low," he said, trying to reassure them both. Outside, the laughter grew louder, echoing through the storm, taunting him. He cursed under his breath. "They're getting closer," he murmured. Her panic sparked an urgency in him, and for a brief moment he could only think of how to keep her safe. She urged, eyes darting around the room. "Stay here, just hold on," he said, retreating to the window. He needed to offer her some semblance of protection. The wind slammed against the cabin like a feral animal, but behind it the boys were closing in, their jokes tinged with bravado, buoyed by alcohol and a sense of unfounded power. "I can't hide here anymore," she said, her voice rising with desperation. "Listen to me," he said, turning sharply to face her. "If they find you, it'll be worse. We have to be patient." She nodded, but uncertainty remained etched in her features. "I'm scared," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Fear is normal," Ethan said, trying to keep his own panic in check. "But we have to channel it into something productive." With every moment that passed, the tension thickened like the storm outside, heavy, smothering. They both listened intently as the voices grew closer, angrily calling out her name, searching. The sound swirled around them like a storm cloud, wrapping tightly around their hearts. Lily breathed, clutching the worn blanket around her shoulders as if it could shield her from what loomed outside. "They can't," Ethan replied firmly, even as doubt gnawed at him. Suddenly, a loud thud against the door rattled the cabin, and fear spiked through both of them. Lily's eyes were wide with dread. "Stay quiet," he urged, moving to the door again, pressing his ear against the wood. The laughter had morphed into shouts, further emboldening the knot of fear. One of the boys shouted, and the edges of Ethan's composure began to unravel. "Let's go out the back," he suggested, his mind racing. If they were going to escape at all, they needed to move. The back door led into the deep forest, away from the danger that lurked nearby. But before they could make a move, another loud crash sent adrenaline surging through Ethan's veins. He exclaimed, grabbing the rifle tightly as Lily's face went pale with fear. She cried, the terror etched in her features. "Neither do I," he responded, feeling a fierce sense of anger rise within him. No one should have to fear for their life like this. They quickly moved toward the back door, hearts hammering as they shoved it open, the cold air rushing in like a breath of hope. The snow swirled around them in a blinding white, but there was no turning back now. He yelled, urging Lily to sprint ahead as he kept watch behind them. Lily took off into the woods, and Ethan followed, plunging into the snow as the trees surrounded them, the storm muffling the sounds of the chaos they had left behind. The biting wind whipped against their faces, but it felt like freedom, like running away from the weight of the world. The cold stung, but adrenaline kept them moving, pushing through the snow as branches snagged at their clothes. They ran until their lungs burned with effort, and finally they skidded to a stop in a clearing. Lily panted, glancing back as if expecting the boys to come charging through the trees. "Head further east," Ethan said between breaths, scanning the area. There was an abandoned hunting cabin not far from here. They pressed onward, snow crunching beneath their feet as they navigated through the forest, still aware that danger was lingering just beyond their reach. Finally, they spotted it, a small, rundown cabin barely visible through the snow. Ethan called, leading the way toward it. They reached the door, and with a heaving push, he shoved it open. The cabin smelled of damp wood and decay, but it was a shelter, a place to hide from the world outside. Once inside, they quickly barricaded the door with old crates, breathing heavily as the sounds of the storm drowned out the chaos behind them. "I can't believe we made it," Lily said, leaning against the wall, her chest heaving as she tried to steady her breath. "Stay here," Ethan said, moving to the window to peer out into the swirling night once more. Despite the adrenaline, the fear bubbled beneath the surface. He had to keep them safe, even if it meant facing whatever was out there. Lily asked, her voice trembling. "Maybe," he replied, feeling the weight of uncertainty again. The two of them sat against the wall, hearts racing as they waited, listening for any sounds that might indicate they were not alone. Inside, an uneasy resolve formed between them, a bond forged in desperation and survival. "Thank you for saving me, Ethan," she said, her voice a whisper while they both sat together. "I couldn't just leave you out there," he replied, turning to meet her gaze. "No one deserves what you went through. You're brave, Lily." A brief moment of silence passed, where the world outside felt timeless, as they settled into an understanding, a shared sense of resilience. They spent the hours that followed in tense silence, listening to the storm howl outside and the old cabin creak around them. But they shared stories, moments of laughter mingling with the darkness, creating tiny flickers of light in their bleak situation. As dawn approached, the wind began to die down, the fury of the storm giving way to a gentle snowfall. Ethan felt a weight shift in the air, a sense of peace. "Maybe it's finally over," he said, reaching the door to crack it open. The world outside was transformed, blanketed in pure white, and Ethan felt the anticipation course through him. "We should find a way back to town," he said, glancing at Lily. "I'm ready," she replied, determination twinkling in her eyes. Ethan nodded firmly, inspired by her resolve. Together, they stepped into the fresh snow, feeling lighter with each step away from the darkness that had threatened to consume them. As they made their way back, he couldn't help but glance at her, the girl who had knocked on his door and changed everything. Together, they had faced a storm, a whirlwind of fear and survival, and emerged stronger. They made a promise to each other, one that would linger in their hearts long after the storm had passed, to seek happiness and to never allow the shadows of their past to define who they were. In that moment, they were not just survivors. They were warriors, ready to reclaim their lives from the darkness that once threatened to take it all away. Side by side, they walked into the new day, leaving behind the fears and pains of the night and stepping boldly into a future filled with hope and possibility. Storm raged outside, clawing at the cabin like a wild beast. The wind howled through the trees, and Ethan pulled his wool blanket tighter around his shoulders as he sat by the fire, flickering shadows dancing on the wooden walls. He'd come to this remote cabin to find peace and solitude, far from the chaos of life in the city. But something in the air felt unsettled, as if the storm had brought with it an ominous energy. Just then, a loud, frantic knock echoed through the cabin, stealing the breath from his lungs. He shot up, heart racing as he glanced toward the door. Who could possibly be out there in this kind of weather? He called, but his voice was swallowed by the howling wind. Another knock came, urgent and desperate. "Help!" a voice cried out, trembling with fear. Ethan's heart pounded in his chest as adrenaline surged through him. He opened the door, bracing himself against the cold. Standing there was a girl, maybe 16 or 17, her hair matted with snow, eyes wide with terror, and a gash on her arm that leaked crimson onto her shirt. He urged, pulling her through the doorway before the wind could drag her back out. The moment he shut the door, the cabin felt like a refuge, the chaos of the storm now a distant roar. She leaned against the wall, struggling to catch her breath, and Ethan quickly grabbed towels to assess her injuries. He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. I ran away," she stuttered, her voice shaking. "They were coming for me, His mind raced as he began to clean her wound, noticing the fear in her eyes, the instinct to survive racing through both of them. They were supposed to be friends, boys from town. Her voice broke, a sob escaping as her shoulders trembled. Ethan felt a wave of anger flood through him. He'd heard stories about boys like that entitled reckless, but standing here with this girl, it felt more personal, more real. He wanted to protect her, to shield her from a world that could be so cruel. "Just breathe," he said, focusing on the task at hand. He finished cleaning the wound and bandaging it, stealing glances at her face as she tried to gather her thoughts. "I can't believe I made it here," Lily said, her eyes welling with tears. "Not on my watch," Ethan replied, feeling a fierce protective instinct awaken within him. Outside, the tempest raged on and dread coiled tightly in his chest. He felt the weight of responsibility resting on his shoulders. Lily opened her mouth to respond, but was interrupted by a loud crash against the cabin door, jolting Ethan from his thoughts. I don't know," she whispered, fear flickering in her eyes. "Stay here," he commanded, heart pounding as he approached the door, every instinct urging him to protect her. He pressed his ear against the wood, listening as shouts echoed from outside. Lily's voice trembled, her eyes wide with terror. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. "We can't let them in. We'll barricade this door," he said, moving toward the pile of firewood. Adrenaline surged through his veins, giving him strength as he began to push logs against the doorframe. She asked, her voice trembling. "If they're looking for you, then yeah," he said grimly, securing the last piece of wood. "But they won't find you here." As he sat back and caught his breath, he glanced at Lily, the terror etched in her face. He asked again, hoping to steady her mind. "Lily," she replied, nodding slightly, her breath coming easier now that they were barricaded. "All right, Lily," he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "Let's come up with a plan." As they huddled together near the flickering fire, the sense of urgency filled the air. She asked, glancing nervously at the door. "The storm might keep them from tracking you," he said. "We can slip out the back when the wind dies down. Head deeper into the woods where it's harder for them to find us," he explained, his mind racing with possibilities. Lily nodded, her expression shifting as she clearly processed his words. "I can't go back." Ethan could feel the weight of her fear, the strength of her determination. "Neither do I will outsmart them," he said, feeling a surge of purpose. "But we need to be patient." As they sat silently, the wind outside thrashed against the cabin, the roar mingling with their shared tension. The atmosphere thickened, wrapping them in an intense cocoon of fear and unrelenting resolve. "Tell me about yourself," Lily said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan glanced at her, surprised by her request. "Me, I'm just a guy looking for some quiet," he replied. "I was just Trying to find a way out, she admitted, staring into the flames. But life doesn't often allow for that. He could see shadows flickering across her face, revealing a past burdened with untold stories. "You're strong to have made it this far," he said, realizing the mood had shifted as she shared more of herself. There was undeniable strength in her vulnerability, a resilience born from hardship. Outside, the wind howled, a reminder of the danger lurking beyond the cabin walls. "We can make it through this," he said, trying to instill hope. As the hours passed, their conversations ebbed and flowed, each word binding them closer amid the storm's fury. They shared dreams, fears, and secrets, forging a connection that felt unbreakable. They were two souls thrown together by the cruel whims of fate, each one struggling against unseen forces. "I just wanted to have a normal night," Lily said, shifting uncomfortably. "Just for once." Ethan could feel the weight of her pain, echoing in the depths of his own past. "It happens more than you realize," he said softly. Suddenly, the wind shifted, a different tone rising above the howling storm. The laughter from outside sharpened, the sound piercing the silence like a knife. "They're still out there," Lily whispered, her body rigid with anxiety. Ethan's heart dropped as he moved again to the doorway, peering through the cracks. The shadows shifted outside, and the boys' voices now seemed close too close. He could feel a clenching fear wrap around him, but he couldn't let Lily see his uncertainty. "Whatever happens, just stay quiet," he instructed, adrenaline pumping through him like a wildfire. He turned back to Lily, watching as the color drained from her face. "I won't let them hurt you," he vowed fiercely, but doubt gnawed at him. Her voice trembled, and he wished he could take away all her fear. "Then we'll fight back," he said, determination bubbling within him. Ethan hurried to the back of the cabin, and as he swung the door open, a fresh wave of cold air hit him. He urged, stepping outside into the swirling snow. The world was a chaotic burst of white, visibility reduced to nothing. No one could see them here. "This way," Ethan hissed, leading Lily into the depths of the woods, barely aware of the branches scratching at their skin. They moved quickly and quietly, hearts pounding as they slipped between the trees. The snow crunched beneath their feet, and every sound felt amplified in the frigid night air. Lily gasped, trying to keep pace with him. "Just a little further," he said, trying to keep his own fear at bay. "There's an old hunting cabin a mile or so from here." But as they pressed on, they could hear the voices behind them, anger and frustration surfacing in the shouts. Anxiety screeched through Ethan's mind. They were chasing them. He urged, forcing Lily to move faster. Need surged through him, the need to protect her at all costs. They ducked between the trees, and as they moved deeper into the woods, the storm began to abate, revealing patches of darker ground beneath the snow. The cabin loomed in the distance, a glimmer of hope in an endless sea of white. He yelled, adrenaline pumping through his veins, pushing him to the limit. They arrived at the hunter's cabin, a dilapidated structure half hidden by branches and snow. Ethan swung the door open and they rushed inside, the warmth offering a moment of relief. Lily asked, breathless, scanning the dark corners of the room. "Barricade the door again," he instructed, feeling a weight settle as they slid the table across the entrance. As they moved closer to the fireplace, he could feel relief washing over them, but it was short-lived. The sound of laughter echoed through the trees like an unwelcome ghost, the boys still searching for them. "They'll find us," Lily whispered, fear creeping back in. "No," Ethan said, shaking his head. They settled against the fireplace, hearts racing, the fire casting flickering shadows on their faces. She asked, looking up at him. "Now," he said, taking a deep breath, "we wait, we keep quiet." As the storm outside fizzled into soft flakes, they wrapped themselves in the warmth of the cabin, two figures entwined by fate. The shack creaked around them, and they were isolated from everything else in the world. "Thank you for being here," Lily said softly, looking at him with gratitude. Ethan felt a warmth unfurling in his chest at her words. "You're stronger than you think, Lily. You survived out there." "Yeah, but I wouldn't have made it without you," she replied, a flicker of a smile breaking through her fear. In that moment, surrounded by shadows and uncertainty, he realized they were no longer just two strangers. They were allies, bound together by shared fear and silent promises. They had each other's backs in the face of adversity. Hours drifted by like the slow flakes of snow falling outside the window, and the boys' voices slowly faded, replaced by the calm sounds of nature reawakening. Lily asked, her voice quiet, filled with hope. "I think so," Ethan said, feeling the rhythm of peace settle in the cabin. When dawn broke, the light rushed through the broken window, bathing the room in warm tones. They had survived the night, and with it, a new strength had emerged between them. "Let's check outside," Ethan said, standing up and moving to the door. He could see the storm's remnants swirling, the white blanket thick as they emerged into the glowing light of morning. He asked Lily, looking back at her with a steady gaze. She nodded. Together, they pushed the door open and stepped out into the new day, hearts pounding with a mix of exhilaration and fear. They took their first steps back into the world, intent on reclaiming their lives after the storm's ferocity. In that moment, they knew they would not bow to fear. They would not be trapped in a cycle of violence or darkness. They had found courage within themselves and each other, the kind that only comes from facing a storm and learning to dance in the rain. Cloaked in fresh snow, they walked side by side, determination etched on their faces. They had faced the worst, and together they would rise again, ready to embrace the life that lay ahead, no longer bound by their past. The wind screamed through the mountains, a howling beast that rattled the old cabin's windows like a warning bell. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of burning wood, warm and inviting, but the storm outside felt more alive. Ethan sat near the fire, flipping through the pages of a well-worn book he'd nearly memorized, the words blurring as the wind crescendoed into a furious roar. Just then, a loud knock jolted him from his reverie. It echoed through the cabin, slicing through the crackling warmth. He shot up from his chair, heart racing in his chest. Who would be out in this weather? Was it even safe to answer? As he approached the door, another knock followed, this one more desperate. "Help!" A voice rang out, filled with urgency and fear. Ethan's stomach sank. Without thinking, he flung the door open, a blast of freezing air hitting him like a wall. Standing there was a girl, no older than 17, her dark hair whipped around her face as snow clung to her clothes. And then he saw it, a deep gash on her arm, blood seeping through the fabric of her sweater. He shouted, pulling her into the warmth of the cabin. She stumbled, nearly falling to the floor as he closed the door against the storm. She leaned against the wall, gasping for breath, and Ethan's mind raced. "I ran," she muttered, her wide eyes darting around the room as if the shadows might swallow her up. He asked, fear coiling in his gut. "Boys from town," she said, her voice trembling. "They thought." His heart twisted. Ethan had always hated stories like the tales of cruelty disguised as jokes, but now it was all too real. "You're safe now," he said. She leaned against the table, unsteady. "I don't know if I can stay," she said, glancing anxiously at the door. Ethan felt a mix of anger and protectiveness surge within him. "They won't find you here." He grabbed a towel and warm water, rushing back to her side. As he pressed the damp cloth against her wound, he felt a knot tighten in his chest. Each breath she took came in shaky gasps. He asked, trying to distract her. "Lily," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "All right, Lily," he said, focusing on her injury. But even as he said the words, doubt crept into his mind. He had no idea how far they would go to find her. The wind howled outside, a menacing reminder of the storm. He asked, gently cleaning the blood with more care than he felt capable of. Tears brimmed in her eyes. What kind of monsters would chase a girl through a storm? The fury of righteousness bubbled inside him as he wrapped the bandage around her arm. "You did the right thing by running," he said, though he questioned whether life had really prepared her for this battle. "I didn't want to be a coward," she murmured, a hint of bravado mixed with vulnerability. "Running doesn't make you a coward," Ethan replied fiercely, locking eyes with her. Outside, the storm was relentless, the wind screeching like a banshee, but within the walls of the cabin, some of the tension began to ease. They found a moment of reprieve, a sanctuary of sorts. Lily asked, her stomach tightening again as shadows moved outside the tiny window. "First, we need to stay quiet," he said, glancing nervously toward the door. Ethan quickly moved to the window, peeking outside through the swirling snow. He could barely make out anything in the white abyss, but the tension in the air was palpable. They were vulnerable here, and he needed to protect her. A loud crash from outside made them both jump, sending a fresh wave of fear coursing through Lily. "They're out there," she said, her voice trembling. "They can't find you if we stay quiet," Ethan reassured her, but even he could feel doubt creeping in. As they huddled together near the fireplace, thoughts raced in Ethan's mind. How could he keep her safe? He couldn't let her go back to whatever horror lay outside. "You need to tell me what happened," he urged, his mind racing to piece together a plan. Lily hesitated before speaking again. "We were at a party. It was supposed to be fun, just a few friends hanging out." Her voice trailed off, heavy with heartbreak. Ethan's stomach churned as he listened. He could feel her pain, the weight of betrayal pressing down on her spirit. "You were brave to escape," he said softly, wanting to reassure her. But for Lily, bravery felt like a distant memory. "Maybe I should have fought back," she said, frustration bubbling to the surface. "Running was the right choice," Ethan insisted. "You survived, you're here now." Silence fell between them, heavy and thick, filled with their shared fears and doubts. Each breath became a thread of connection, weaving their stories closer together. She asked, her voice breaking the silence. "They might," Ethan admitted. "They might think they can find you, but they won't know about this cabin." He pulled her closer to him, wrapping his arm around her shoulders in a protective gesture. "We'll come up with a plan together, Lily." The wind whistled like a ghost outside, and she glanced toward the door, fear flickering in her eyes. "They won't," he said, trying to stay calm and steady for her. In the back of his mind, though, a rush of anxiety churned. How far would these boys go? And what about the next time they heard a knock? They continued talking, sharing pieces of their lives, moments of joy tangled with sorrow, and the room began to feel warmer with their connection. Finally, as the wind seemed to lull for just a moment, Ethan stood up. "Let me check outside," he said, feeling that horrifying pull of responsibility wash over him again. He cracked open the door, peering into the swirling frost. The storm still raged, but he couldn't hear anyone. Maybe they were tracing her footsteps, perhaps losing their way in the dark. Lily watched him, holding her breath like the rest of the world had fallen away. She asked, desperately wanting to know the worry tightening her chest. "Nothing," he said, closing the door as he moved back toward her. Suddenly, another loud thud shook the cabin and panic shot through both of them. Lily cried, nearly jumping out of her skin. Ethan rushed to the door again, leaning against it to hold it steady. He screamed, determination flooding through him. It wasn't just her survival on the line, it was his as well. Voices began to rise outside, angry and searching. One of them shouted, taunting. Ethan felt a surge of protectiveness, his body tensing. "They're here," he whispered, fear crawling through him. Lily's voice quivered, eyes wide with horror. "We can escape through the back door," he said, trying to formulate a plan in the chaos. She nodded, shifting into action as they headed back to the door. Ethan shouted, pushing it open before they both slipped out into the storm, the cold slapping them like a harsh reminder of reality. They ran, breathing heavily as the snow whipped against their faces. The world around them turned into a dizzying blur of white. He urged, guiding her through the trees that loomed like guardians in the night. As they darted off the snow-covered path, their determination surged. All that mattered was getting to safety. "We'll find a place to hide," he called over the wind, desperately trying to keep them focused. Together, they sprinted deeper into the woods, the sounds of their heartbeats sinking to the rhythm of their fight for survival. But Ethan knew they couldn't keep running forever. He needed to find a shelter somewhere to regroup. Lily asked, her breath forming clouds in the freezing air. "There's an old hunting cabin nearby. If we can find it, we can hide out until the storm settles," he said, steeling himself against the cold. As they traveled deeper into the trees, the howling wind turned into the sounds of crunching footsteps behind them. Lily exclaimed, fear knitting her brows together. Ethan shouted, adrenaline surging. Finally, they spotted it, a rundown cabin barely discernible through the swirling snow. He pointed, sprinting toward it with all the strength he could muster. They reached the cabin, and he slammed the door behind them, locking it tight against the storm. Inside, the air was stale but felt like safe haven. They leaned against the door, panting, hearts racing with the thrill of having escaped the storm outside. Lily whispered, darting glances around the dim room, her body trembling. "Let's barricade the door," Ethan said, scanning for anything to use. He quickly pushed an old table against it while Lily helped, panic still boiling beneath their surfaces. Once secured, they stepped back, finally able to breathe in the momentary reprieve. "We'll wait here until morning," Ethan said, turning to Lily. Lily nodded, visibly shaken yet grateful. "They won't," Ethan reassured her, though uncertainty lingered like a shadow. The snowstorm had offered them refuge, but it was far from a secure fortress. As a flickering light from the fireplace danced across their faces, they settled into silence, the warmth of the flames wrapping around them. Hours drifted by like the softly falling snow, and the chaos outside began to fade, lost in the rhythm of nature's lullaby. Eventually, the storm softened, and the cabin around them settled into an uneasy silence. Ethan could see the vulnerability in Lily's eyes and felt it reflected in his own heart. After all they had survived, they were still tangled in danger. "Hey," he said, trying to break the tension. "We're going to get through this." Lily looked up at him, a mix of gratitude and fear in her gaze. "Thank you," she whispered. The warmth of those words settled over him. "You're stronger than you know, Lily." As the first light of dawn began to break through the cracks in the cabin, they both held their breath, listening for any signs of danger. The world outside felt new, washed clean by the storm. Finally, Ethan walked to the door, pressing his ear against it. "It's quiet," he said cautiously. Lily replied, apprehension lacing her voice. He turned back to her, determination shining in his eyes. Together, they pushed the door open, stepping into the newly awash world bright and untouched, blanketed in white. They breathed in the fresh air, and it felt like freedom, tinged with remnants of the fear they had escaped. Lily asked, glancing around at the clean expanse. "Now we move," Ethan said, gripping her hand. With a final look at the cabin that had sheltered them through the storm, they walked side by side, gazing into the vastness before them, knowing that nothing would bind them to the past again. As they ventured onward, stepping into a new chapter, they realized they could face it whatever lay ahead together, two survivors against the world, ready to reclaim their lives, unbroken and unafraid. The wind howled ferociously outside, a wailing beast that rattled the old cabin, making it seem as if the forest itself was alive with fury. Ethan sat by the fire, the flickering flames casting long shadows against the wooden walls. He had come to this remote place to escape the noise of the world, to find solace in the stillness of the mountains. But tonight, the storm felt different, charged with an anxious energy. As he settled deeper into his chair, a frantic knock shattered the relative peace. It echoed through the cabin, jolting him upright. Who in their right mind would be out here in this weather? With a heart pounding like a drum, he approached the door. He called, but his voice was swallowed by the howling wind. Another knock came, forceful and desperate. "Help!" It was a girl's voice, sharp with fear. His stomach knotted as dread seeped into his bones. Without a second thought, he opened the door, and a blast of icy air rushed in, striking him like a wave. There she stood, clothes torn and soaked, blood dripping from a gash on her arm, her dark hair framing a face that was both beautiful and terrified. He urged, pulling her into the warmth of the cabin. She stumbled in, nearly collapsing, the door slamming shut against the frigid winds. Ethan asked, instantly gripped by a sense of urgency. He moved to help her, guiding her to the fire. She sank onto the floor, trembling uncontrollably. I need help," she gasped, her wide eyes filled with raw panic. He pressed, kneeling beside her, settling his hands gently on her shoulders, trying to keep her steady. "I ran," she stammered, her voice quaking like the flickering shadows. "They were coming for me," he demanded, fury rising within him. The protective instinct surged. Who would hurt a girl like this? Her voice broke, tears streaming down her cheeks. Ethan's heart sank as the pieces fell into place. He had heard the rumor stories about those boys, reckless and entitled, often priding themselves on their supposed power. But those stories had felt like distant echoes to him, not the brutal reality they represented in this moment. He grabbed a towel, soaking it in warm water, trying to clear her wound with careful hands. Her voice was barely a whisper, painted with an undertone of dread. "They won't," he assured her, although deep down the uncertainty gnawed at him. The wild storm outside reminded him of the chaos that could easily seep through their thin sanctuary. She looked down at her arm, visibly trembling. "I thought I was going to die out there," she said, the weight of despair lacing her words. "You're not going to die," Ethan insisted, wrapping the towel securely around her arm, desperation gripping him. But the fear looming in her eyes told him more than words could. Outside, the wind howled like a feral beast, the storm raging against the cabin walls. He asked, wanting to pull her out of that dark place just a little bit. "Lily," she breathed, her voice thick with unshed tears. "All right, Lily," he said, locking eyes with her, hoping to ground her in that moment. Lily nodded, but doubt still flickered in her gaze. The words were raw, filled with the pain of her experience. Ethan felt the weight of her fear, but he pushed it down. "Then we'll figure it out." They moved in silence, adrenaline coursing through them as he barricaded the door with anything he could find: an old trunk, a bench, anything that could slow down an intruder. "Ethan," she said suddenly, her voice quaking, "what if they find us? I can't go back there." "Breathe, Lily," he said firmly, wanting to comfort her. "We're going to be okay." They settled by the fire, and she wrapped her arms around her knees, her breath still shallow but steadying. Outside, the wind raged, and it became clear that they were not safe yet. Ethan asked, cautious yet curious, trying to distract her from the terror still gripping her heart. "I thought it would be fun," she said, tears gathering again. "I thought I could let loose, make new friends, but they turned on me." The vulnerability in her voice hit him hard. He could sense the heavy weight of betrayal, the fragility of innocence shattered. "You didn't deserve that," he said, his voice low and sincere. "I shouldn't have trusted them," she murmured, looking into the fire. "You survived," Ethan reminded her, allowing that flicker of hope to spark between them. "And now you're here." But just as the tension began to ease, a loud crash echoed outside, ricocheting through the calm. Both of them jumped, eyes widening in horror. Lily's voice was tight with panic. "I don't know," he replied, moving cautiously to the window. His heart raced as he peered through the blinds, the world outside swallowed by the storm. "Stay back," he urged Lily, feeling the protective instinct surge once more. The dark trees danced wildly in the wind, obscuring his view, but he could hear laughter high-pitched and mocking, interspersed with shouts from nearby. "Lily!" The voice rang like a knife slicing through the night, and Ethan's blood turned cold. Lily whispered urgently, her eyes darting around the cabin, searching for an escape. "We get ready for anything," Ethan said, forcing confidence into his voice. They pushed back to the corner of the room, their hearts racing in sync as the storm howled outside. Ethan's mind raced with possibilities. If they broke down the door, he had to be ready. But as the minutes turned into an eternity, dread twisted his stomach. He began. "They will make sure I go back," Lily finished for him, her voice trembling. Outside, the laughter grew louder, the shadows of the boys approaching the cabin, their drunken bravado mingling with the howling wind. "Stay close," Ethan instructed, gripping the rifle he had grabbed from above the mantel. It felt heavy and foreign in his hands, but he wanted to protect her at any cost. "No," he said fiercely, the fire swimming in his chest. She exclaimed, wide-eyed. "We can't stay here and wait for them to break in," he replied, the flickering light casting shadows across his face. "We'll make it into the woods. They can't find us if they can't see us." As they formulated their escape plan, a loud crash erupted as something slammed against the door. The boys were here, and the air thickened with tension. Ethan shouted, shoving open the back door. They sprinted into the snow, each breath a cloud of vapor in the frigid air. He urged, feet pounding against the snowy ground. The world became a blur of white as they raced through the trees, snow crunching beneath their boots. The wind whipped against them, but adrenaline pushed them forward. He shouted, glancing back to see shadows moving behind them, searching. Then another laugh echoed on the wind, sending a shiver down his spine. They were hunting them. Lily gasped, her breath quickening as she stumbled in the deepening snow. He urged, reaching for her hand. Just a bit further. They pushed on, the shadows growing closer as they leapt over fallen branches and ducked under low-hanging limbs. But fear didn't dim their determination. Finally, through the thickening trees, Ethan spotted it, a derelict old hunting cabin, barely visible between the trees. "There," he yelled, pushing forward, pulling Lily along. They reached the cabin and darted inside, slamming the door behind them. It creaked ominously, but for the moment it felt like safety. Lily panted, her cheeks flushed from the cold and fear. "I don't know," Ethan replied, glancing out a dusty window. The storm still howled outside, but he could hear muffled voices not far away. "We need to block the door," Lily said, her voice steadying as she grabbed an old table, sliding it against the entrance. As they secured their makeshift barricade, Ethan's heart raced, panic rising. He began, but he couldn't finish. The thought was too oppressive. "We won't let them," she insisted, her voice strong, filled with defiance. He marveled at her resolve, and in that moment he felt a sense of solidarity. Together they would face whatever darkness loomed outside. As they settled into a corner of the cabin, the wind sang a haunting tune outside, wrapping them in an uneasy cocoon of silence. They huddled close to conserve warmth, the adrenaline slowly fading but leaving behind an unsettling energy. "Ethan," Lily said suddenly, breaking the silence, "thank you for helping me." "You've shown more strength than I have," he replied, looking her in the eyes. The connection between them deepened, bound by fear and vulnerability in the midst of chaos. But just as hope began to creep in, a loud crash rattled the cabin, sending adrenaline coursing through Ethan's veins once more. "They found us," he exclaimed, urgency flaring in his chest. Lily cried, eyes wide. "Stay quiet," he whispered, his heart pounding. He gripped the rifle tightly, adrenaline washing over him as they prepared for whatever was to come. The terror outside grew louder, laughter tinged with malice, a haunting reminder that they weren't safe yet. Footsteps approached, crunching in the snow, and Ethan held his breath, every muscle tense. "They know we're here," he murmured. With a sudden explosion of noise, the door rattled, shaking under the weight of forceful shoves from outside. "Stop!" The taunting voice rang out, venomous and mocking. As the door began to lean dangerously, fear and desperation intertwined within them. This was it, the moment everything could change. It was one thing to survive the storm, but another to face the monsters waiting just outside. Ethan shot a glance at Lily, their eyes locking in a moment of understanding. No matter what happened next, they'd face it together. With a final push that made the door shudder, the world outside seemed to open wide with relentless danger, and the weight of their fates hung in the balance. Ethan shouted, adrenaline surging as the door cracked wider. As the shadows of their pursuers threatened to break through, the strength of their resolve collided with the chaos of the storm, leaving them on the edge of the unknown, fighting for their survival in a world that had turned dark. And then, with a final crash, the door burst open.